Today's story is so grim and gripping, it proves how fast peace can burn away. Deep in the American West, where quiet homesteads sit one step from violence. This is a land ruled by dust, fire, and men who believe money gives them the right to decide who stays and who disappears. It all started with a railroad's threat and a field set ablaze. A single move that turned an ordinary morning into a defining moment of resistance. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. They say a man's land is his legacy. But when red iron rails set fire to Sawyer Holt's cornfield on a September morning in 1882, they didn't just destroy a harvest. They sparked something far more dangerous. Smoke rolled across his Montana homestead, not only hiding their escape but giving Sawyer exactly what he needed. Cover enough to vanish while he fed round after round into his Winchester 73. The 5 riders who lit the blaze were still laughing when the first shot split the haze, then the second. By the third shot, laughter turned to fear. Sawyer Holt had spent 20 years carving that farm out of raw land, every stalk of corn a testament to surviving rattlesnakes, drought, and raiding parties. But greed had finally found him. The railroad wanted his water. When Sawyer refused their offer, the answer came in flames. What they hadn't known was that the quiet farmer watching his life burn had once worn a ranger's badge. He'd set aside the rifle to build instead of break, to live in peace. Yet, as Sawyer worked the lever of his Winchester, metal clicking in steady rhythm, he remembered words from an old captain. A peaceful man is not a harmless one. Behind him, the cornfield crackled and snapped, smoke thick as river fog. Somewhere inside that gray curtain, 5 hired guns were about to learn what happens when you corner a man with nothing left to lose. Because this is where everything changes. The morning had begun like any other on the Holt homestead. Sawyer rose before dawn, brushed a kiss across Elin Holt's forehead without waking her, and stepped outside to check the irrigation channels. The corn stood tall and gold in the early light. 40 acres of the finest crop he'd ever grown. At 53, Sawyer had finally built the life he once dreamed of during his hard ranger years. His hands, rough from 2 decades of farming, had nearly forgotten the feel of a rifle gripped in anger. Nearly. He was crouched by the main channel, clearing debris, when he heard horses. 5 riders approached from the east, silhouettes cut sharp by the rising sun. Sawyer straightened slowly. He recognized the lead horse, a distinctive paint belonging to Briggs Calderon, chief enforcer for Red Iron Rail. These weren't the first men the company had sent. 3 weeks earlier, a slick man in a fine suit had offered Sawyer $800 for his land. When Sawyer refused, explaining that the spring on his property fed 3 neighboring farms, the man's smile had frozen like creek ice in January. Now Briggs Calderon sat tall in his saddle, a burning torch already in his fist. 4 others flanked him, dressed in the mismatched blend of cowboy gear and cheap suits that marked hired muscle. Sawyer's heart pounded, but his voice stayed level. "You're trespassing on private land, Briggs." Calderon spat tobacco juice into the irrigation channel. "Not for long, Holt. Alaric Thornwell's patience is gone. You've got one last chance to take the offer before we make sure this land isn't worth farming." Sawyer glanced toward the house. Elin would still be asleep. His Winchester was in the barn, 30 yards away, too far. His pistol lay inside, hanging on the bedpost like a relic from another life. The math ran fast through his head. 5 armed men, him empty-handed, his wife in danger. Sometimes a man had to bend to survive. Briggs Calderon read that calculation in Sawyer's stance and grinned. That grin stayed on his face as he hurled the torch into the corn. Dry stalks caught instantly, Flames raced through the field like a prairie storm. The other riders followed, torches arcing through the air, landing across the crop. Within minutes, smoke rose in thick columns. Sawyer stood still, watching 20 years of work go up in fire. Heat pressed against his face even from 30 feet away. His eyes burned, but not from smoke alone. The riders circled, laughing, shouting as the fire spread. They'd done this before. It showed in their easy movements, the way they stayed upwind, the practiced throws meant to destroy everything. Briggs Calderon guided his paint closer, close enough that Sawyer smelled whiskey mixing with acrid smoke. Red Iron Rail owns this valley now, Holt. We control the water. We control the future. You're just too stubborn to see it. Smoke thickened, rolling in gray waves across the yard. Sawyer's eyes fixed on the barn door through the haze. The Winchester was inside, exactly where he'd left it after shooting a coyote last month. Loaded or empty? He couldn't remember. Nothing to say? Briggs mocked. All that corn gone in 20 minutes. Maybe now you'll listen. Sawyer's jaw tightened. Through the smoke, he saw Elin step onto the porch, her hand flying to her mouth in horror. One of the riders noticed her too, nudging his horse her way. That was when something shifted deep in Sawyer's chest. The ranger he'd buried under 2 decades of peaceful work clawed back to the surface. When Sawyer spoke, his voice was low and deadly calm. You boys made a mistake. Briggs Calderon laughed. What mistake? Looks to me like we're teaching you a lesson. The smoke, Sawyer Holt cut in. You gave me cover. Before Briggs could make sense of it, Sawyer was already moving, not toward the house, but for the barn. The smoke swallowed him in 3 long strides. Briggs Calderon's laughter caught in his throat. One heartbeat, the farmer stood there, beaten. The next, he vanished into the haze like a ghost. Where'd he go? Shouted Tobin Hale, the youngest of the crew. Doesn't matter, Briggs snapped, though his hand slid to his pistol. He's unarmed, probably running for the hills. But Sawyer wasn't running. He was hunting. Years peeled away as he slipped through the smoke with the quiet discipline of his ranger days. His lungs burned, but he knew how to work through pain. The barn rose ahead, a dark shape behind the gray curtain. Behind him, riders shouted, trying to regroup. They split up. Mistake number 2. You don't divide your force when you can't see. Sawyer reached the barn and eased inside. The smell of hay and leather steadied him. His hands found the Winchester in the dark, hanging where it always did. He worked the lever, felt the hollow click. Empty. His fingers flew to the shelf, found the ammo box. Hooves shifted in the smoke outside. They were circling, trying to flush him out. Sawyer loaded with the smooth certainty of muscle memory. 1 round, 2, 3. The tube took 15. He fed them home, one by one. Each metallic slide marked the change, from farmer back to fighter. Briggs's voice cut through the haze. You're making this worse for yourself. Come out now and we'll let your wife walk. Sawyer paused on the 14th round. So they were threatening Elin Holt now. The last cartridge slid home with a final, decisive click. He pulled the red bandana from his pocket, the same one from his ranger days, and tied it over his nose and mouth. Through the barn side window, shadows moved. They thought they had him boxed. Sawyer shifted to the side door away from the house. The smoke was his ally, thick as wool, visibility down to a few yards. Somewhere left, Tobin Hale's voice wavered, calling for Briggs. Young and green, Sawyer thought. First real fight. The boy would learn, if he lived. The Winchester settled right in Sawyer's hands, balanced and sure. He'd bought it new in '73, the year Winchester perfected the lever. It had carried him through his last Ranger years. Now it would carry him through whatever came next. He stepped out, hugging the barn wall. The bandana filtered the worst of the fumes. His eyes adjusted, finding movement where the hired guns saw only gray. 20 feet ahead, a horse snorted. Sawyer dropped to one knee and shouldered the rifle. A rider emerged. Not Tobin, but a thick-set man with a scar down his cheek. One of Briggs's regulars, Merrick Sloan. Sloan scanned the wrong way, pistol drawn but low. Sawyer's finger found the trigger. Time slowed, like it always did before shots broke. "You could leave," a voice whispered. "Take Elin. Start over." But that meant abandoning the families downstream who depended on his spring. It meant letting red iron rails swallow another piece of free land. It meant living as the man who let them burn his fields and threaten his wife. The choice took less than a heartbeat. Sawyer squeezed. The Winchester cracked, sharp and clean. Sloan jerked in the saddle, his pistol flying free. He grabbed his shoulder, screaming. His horse reared and dumped him hard into the dirt. Through the smoke, Briggs Calderon's voice sharpened, confidence gone. "Shots fired. He's armed. Everybody." Sawyer was already moving. He levered another round home, brass spinning into the haze. Training came back like breathing. Shoot, move, communicate. Except there was no one to talk to. He was alone, against 5. Make that 4. Sawyer Holt slid along the length of the barn, staying low and letting the smoke do the work. Merrick Sloan was still screaming somewhere behind him, which told Sawyer the shot had done its job. The man would live. Sawyer had taken the shoulder, not the heart. He'd ended enough lives during his Ranger years to last a lifetime. But he'd also learned how to stop a man without killing him. That skill hadn't dulled. Another shape broke through the haze on his right. Tobin Hale, the kid. Even through the smoke, Sawyer could see the fear draining the color from his face. The boy's gun hand shook, finger tight on the trigger, sweeping at shadows that weren't there. "Don't," Sawyer called, voice muffled by the bandana. "Don't do it, son." Tobin spun toward the sound and fired wildly. 3 shots cracked, none closer than 10 feet. Panic. Wasted lead. Sawyer fired once, low. Tobin's horse screamed as the round passed close enough to spook it. The animal bolted, hauling Tobin into the smoke, the boy clinging to the saddle horn. 3 left now, Briggs Calderon and 2 others Sawyer didn't yet know. The corn fire was at full roar, heat pounding even through the smoke. Flames cast an orange glow that turned the homestead into something out of hell. "You're a dead man, Holt." Briggs's voice echoed ahead. "You think you can take us all? You're just a worn-out farmer." Sawyer angled toward the voice, the Winchester steady in his hands. Briggs talked too much. Always had. It was a weakness Sawyer meant to use. Through a thin break in the smoke, he caught sight of the house. Elin Holt was gone from the porch. Good. She'd be inside, taking cover, maybe grabbing Sawyer's old Colt from the bedroom. Frontier sense ran deep in her. She'd know when to stay put. A bullet hissed past Sawyer's ear, close enough that he felt the air move. He dropped flat, rolled left, and came up behind a water trough. Return fire snapped overhead, chewing splinters from the trough's rim. At least 2 shooters now, firing from different angles. They'd stopped yelling. They were thinking. Sawyer counted to 3, then rose and fired twice in quick succession. The Winchester cycled smooth as silk, each pull and push feeding the next round. He aimed at muzzle flashes, not bodies, forcing them down instead of chasing kills. A sharp grunt told him one round had found flesh. not fatal. The wind shifted, thinning the smoke in patches. That could help him, or get him killed. Sawyer belly-crawled away from the trough, circling toward the sound of pain. His elbows scraped the dirt of his own yard, the soil he'd plowed and planted. The irony bit hard. 53 years old, crawling through his own land, fighting for his life because a railroad wanted his water. Through the thinning haze, he spotted one man crouched behind the chicken coop. Blood soaked the leg of his trousers, but he still held his rifle, watching for movement. Sawyer recognized him then. Rafe Holloway, a killer out of Butte, 3 notches on his belt, if the stories were true. Rafe's head turned, searching. Sawyer had a clean shot, center mass. Maybe 8 seconds before the smoke shifted and gave him away. The old question surfaced. How much mercy does a man owe someone trying to kill him? Rafe answered it himself. His eyes locked on movement near the house, Elan's shadow crossing a window. Rafe smiled, a predator's grin, and swung his rifle toward the house. Sawyer didn't hesitate. The Winchester barked once. Rafe Holloway pitched backward, his rifle clattering against the coop. He wouldn't be carving any more notches. 2 down, 2 wounded or gone. That left Briggs Calderon and 1 other. The gunfire faded into a heavy, unnatural quiet, broken only by the crackle of dying flames and the pop of stressed wood. Sawyer reloaded, feeding fresh rounds into the magazine. 8 shots fired, 7 left in the rifle, plus the ammo box still in the barn, if he could reach it. Briggs's voice cut through the smoke, changed now. The swagger was gone, replaced by something colder. Holt, you listening? Sawyer stayed silent, shifting position. Never answer. Never give away your place. Ranger rules. You've got 2 of my men, Briggs went on. I'll give you that. Didn't think an old dirt farmer had it in him. But here's the truth. Sawyer settled behind an overturned wagon, studying the smoke, waiting for movement. Briggs kept talking. You can't win this. Even if you drop us all, Red Iron Rail will send more. Better men. 20 if it takes that many. Briggs paused, then softened his tone. But maybe we can make a deal. You proved your point. You're no scared sodbuster. The company respects strength. What if we doubled it? Briggs Calderon called out. $1,600, enough to buy land anywhere you want. Start over. Through a break in the smoke, Sawyer Holt spotted him. Briggs standing beside the well, using the stone lip for cover. But something didn't sit right. Briggs was alone. No sign of the 5th man, which meant the last rider was circling, looking for an angle while Briggs kept Sawyer talking. Old tactics. These weren't just hired fists. Sawyer ran the angles in his head. If the flanker was moving, he'd come from the east by the tool shed or swing west past the vegetable garden. The garden sat closer to the house. He'd pick the east, safer, less chance of crossing fire from Elan Holt. The smoke shifted, and Sawyer caught a flicker by the tool shed. A man creeping low, rifle shouldered. Sawyer knew him. Kellen Voss, ex-cavalry, sharp with ambush work from the Indian Wars. Dangerous. Briggs kept talking, but Sawyer shut it out. 30 seconds, maybe less, before Voss had a clean line. Sawyer chose. He rose from behind the wagon and sprinted toward the house, angling his run to draw Voss's fire while keeping momentum. The gamble worked. Voss took the bait, popping up for a clearer shot. 2 cracks split the air, both rounds passing behind Sawyer. He hit the dirt in a controlled slide, rolled, came up with the Winchester already set, and fired once. Voss jerked hard, his rifle dropping. He clutched his side and staggered back, disappearing around the shed. Not dead, but done. That left only Briggs. The smoke thinned fast now, the corn fire burning down to glowing stubble. Soon there'd be no cover. Just two men in the open. Briggs felt it too. He broke from the well and ran for his horse, the paint tied near what remained of the field. Sawyer stood and tracked him. 50 yards. Moving target. Crosswind off the fire. He'd made harder shots. His finger rested on the trigger. One squeeze, and Briggs' Calderon would faceplant in Montana dirt. Payment for the threats, the fire, 20 years of peace burned away. Sawyer hesitated. Briggs reached the horse and swung into the saddle. For a heartbeat, their eyes met across the smoky yard. Briggs's hand slid toward the rifle scabbard, then stopped. He saw it in Sawyer's stance, in the way the Winchester never wavered. A man who'd stared down enough guns knew when one more move meant death. "This isn't over, Holt," Briggs called, trying for menace and missing. "Red Iron Rail doesn't forget." Sawyer answered softly, his voice carrying in the settling smoke. "Neither do I. You tell Alaric Thornwell that Sawyer Holt is staying put. You tell him the next men he sends, I won't aim to wound." Briggs paused. Sawyer went on. "And tell him 5 horses rode in. Only one's riding out. That's the price of trying to burn a man off his land." Briggs's face drained. He wheeled the paint and spurred hard, galloping toward the eastern trees. Sawyer kept the Winchester trained until horse and rider vanished into the pines. Only then did he lower the rifle. His hands trembled as the tension bled out. The yard looked like a war ground. Merrick Sloan lay near the barn, clutching his ruined shoulder, moaning. Rafe Holloway didn't move, sprawled behind the chicken coop. Tobin Hale's hat lay abandoned in the dirt. Kellen Voss was gone, a dark blood trail marking his escape. Elin Holt stepped out of the house, Sawyer's old Colt in her hand, jaw set hard. When she saw Sawyer standing, whole, her resolve broke. She ran to him, and he caught her with one arm, the Winchester still in the other. "I thought," she started. "I know," he said quietly. "I'm all right." They held each other while the field smoldered behind them. 40 acres reduced to ash and black stalks. Sloan groaned louder. Elin pulled back, the nurse in her taking over. She'd tended wounded men before, back when Sawyer was still riding hard. "I'll see to him," she said, steady again. "Can't let a man bleed out, even if he came here to hurt us." Sawyer nodded. That was the woman Sawyer Holt had married. Hard as rawhide, yet carrying mercy where it counted. While Elin Holt tended Merrick Sloan, wrapping his ruined shoulder with torn strips of cloth, Sawyer moved across the property. Kellen Voss had dragged himself to his horse and somehow climbed into the saddle despite the wound. Blood streaked the leather. It told Sawyer enough. Voss had ridden out and wouldn't get far before needing a doctor. Near the creek, Sawyer spotted Tobin Hale's horse wandering, still wild-eyed and shaking. The animal could be calmed later. There was something else first. Rafe Holloway lay on his back, eyes fixed on the Montana sky, seeing nothing at all. Sawyer took off his hat and murmured a short prayer. Even a killer deserved that. Rafe had been a man once, before whatever road led him here. By noon, the smoke had burned away completely. The cornfield was finished. 40 acres of blackened stubble where gold had stood that morning. Sawyer studied the ruin, already counting costs. Without that crop, winter would bite hard. There'd be no money for seed come spring. Elin returned with coffee and stood beside him in silence. She knew better than to dress pain up with empty words. The loss cut deep. But they were alive, and the land itself remained. The spring still ran clear. The soil would heal. "Sheriff's coming," Elin said, pointing toward a rider approaching from town. Sheriff Rowan Beck rode a buckskin mare. his star flashing under the midday sun. He was a fair man, honest. Still, he walked a narrow line between ordinary folk and the powerful interests swallowing Montana whole. He'd overlooked small things before, but 5 men shot on one homestead demanded attention. Beck dismounted and took in the scene with a practiced eye. The burned field. Sloan propped against the barn, shoulder bound. Rafe Holloway's body beneath a tarp, bullet scars chewed into wood and dirt. "Sawyer," Beck said, then softer, "walk me through it." Sawyer told it straight. Briggs Calderon and 4 men came to burn him out. They threatened Elin. He defended his land, within his rights. Beck listened, occasionally glancing at Sloan, who nodded at the key points. When Sawyer finished, the sheriff stood quiet for a long moment. "Red Iron Rail's been pushing hard," Beck finally said. "They want this whole valley. I've got 3 other reports: harassment, intimidation, a barn burned near Livingston." He looked back at Sawyer. "You're the first to push back like this." "Didn't have much choice," Sawyer said. "No," Beck agreed. "You didn't." The sheriff crossed to Rafe's body, lifted the tarp, studied the wound. Clean, center mass. He lowered the cloth and met Sawyer's eyes. "That's ranger work, old habits." Then his voice dropped. "They won't let this go, you know that." Sawyer nodded. He'd known the moment he pulled the trigger. You didn't put down hired guns and walk away untouched. Alaric Thornwell had money enough to hire an army if he wanted. Lawyers, judges, politicians. One Montana farmer with a Winchester wasn't meant to be a problem. "They'll come legal first," Beck said quietly, so Elin wouldn't hear. "False charges. Claims you ambushed them. They'll try to drag you into a courtroom they already own." He paused. "And if that fails, they'll come the other way. More guns, more fire. And next time, they might not wait for you to step outside." The weight of it settled on Sawyer's shoulders. He'd traded his badge for a plow, his rifle for seed, chasing peace. But peace didn't come free. The world pushed until a man had no choice but to push back. "I can't run, Rowan," Sawyer said. "Elin and we built a life here, and those families downstream." "I know," Beck cut in. "Ethan Lockridge, Miles Lockridge, Han Liu, Maud Ashcroft. They all depend on your water. If Red Iron Rail gets it, they'll bleed folks dry." Beck rolled a cigarette with slow care. "But you're one man. Railroads have resources you can't match." He lit the cigarette, exhaled. "Even if you're the fastest gun in Montana, you can't shoot a corporation." He studied the scorched field, the blood-stained dirt, what had been a quiet morning. "Truth is, I'd probably have done the same." Then his face hardened. "But I won't be the one living with what comes next." He looked back at Sawyer. "You crossed a line today. There's no stepping back. Whatever happens, Thornwell's going to make an example of you." From the house, Elin called out. More riders appeared, this time coming in from town. Sawyer Holt recognized Dr. Sylvan Moore's buggy first, likely called in by someone who'd heard the shooting. Right behind it rode 2 neighbors, the Lockridge brothers, rifles resting across their saddles. Ethan Lockridge and Miles Lockridge swung down with grim expressions. Both were in their 30s, solid men, hard-working farmers, whose land bordered Sawyer's to the south. Ethan spoke first. "We heard gunfire and rode straight out." "It's done," Sawyer said, though he wasn't fully convinced it was. Miles took in the damage, the scorched field, the torn earth, his jaw tightening. "Red Iron Rail's men did this. Briggs Calderon and 4 others tried to burn us out," Sawyer said. "They threatened Elin. The brothers exchanged a look. Ethan spoke again, choosing his words carefully. "Sawyer, you should know. We had visitors yesterday. 2 men in suits offered to buy our place. And when you said no, they said we'd regret it. Said accidents happen to stubborn farmers." Cold settled in Sawyer's gut. This wasn't just about him anymore. Alaric Thornwell was squeezing the whole valley, pushing out anyone who wouldn't sell. And Sawyer's spring sat at the center of it. Control the water, control the land. Dermnaston Moore finished checking Merrick Sloan and walked over, wiping his hands. "The shoulder's clean. He'll live." He nodded toward the barn. "But we need to get him into town. And Sawyer, you'll need to give a statement about the other one." He meant Rafe Holloway. Sheriff Rowan Beck stepped in. "I'll handle the statement, Doc. Right now, securing this place comes first. If Thornwell sends more men, they won't." A new voice cut in. Everyone turned. Hanlu stood at the edge of the property, his teenage son Jun beside him. Hanlu had kept quiet through weeks of pressure, head down, hoping not to draw notice. Now he stepped forward, resolve clear in his eyes. "My family stands with Sawyer Holt," he said. "We fight together." From the tree line emerged Maud Ashcroft, an ancient shotgun resting in her arms. "And I'm not going anywhere," she said flatly. "This is our valley. We built it together." Others followed, families who depended on Sawyer's spring, folks who'd shared tools, labor, and food during lean years. Neighbors no longer, community. By sundown, 15 men and women stood in Sawyer's yard, armed and ready. The message couldn't be mistaken. Burn one, you answer to all. Sheriff Beck studied the gathering and shook his head, a faint smile tugging at his mouth. "This is either the bravest thing I've ever seen," he said, "or the dumbest. Maybe both." Something shifted inside Sawyer. He'd believed he was alone, one man facing impossible odds. But the frontier had a way of proving you wrong. People who seemed soft in peaceful times could turn hard as oak when pushed. Mrs. Liu brought food from their wagon, rice and vegetables enough for everyone. The gathering took on the air of a town meeting, every rifle kept close. Plans followed. The Lockridge brothers would ride night patrol along the perimeter. Jun, who'd learned telegraphy in San Francisco, would head into town and wire Governor Thane Merriweather's office about Red Iron Rail's intimidation. Maud Ashcroft surprised them all by mentioning a lawyer in Helena, Bennett Crowell, a land rights man who owed her late husband a favor. "We make this legal," Ethan Lockridge said. "Make enough noise Thornwell can't crush us quietly." "And be ready if he tries anyway," Miles added. As the sun dropped, the volunteers returned to their own properties, promising to come back at first light. Elin pressed jars of her canned goods into their hands. Whatever lay ahead, they'd face it together. When the last wagon disappeared, Sawyer and Elin stood alone in the yard. The smell of burned corn still clung to the air. Rafe Holloway's body had already been taken to town. Merrick Sloan had been hauled off to face charges. The signs of violence were fading, but the meaning of the day remained. "We could still leave," Elin said quietly. "Take what we can carry. Start over. Oregon, California." Sawyer looked at his wife of 26 years. "Is that what you want?" She shook her head. "No, this is home. I'm just saying the choice exists." "Not really," Sawyer said. "If we run, Thornwell wins. And he'll do this again. To someone else, and someone after that. Someone has to stand." Elin took his hand. "Then we stand. Together." That night, Sawyer slept with the Winchester beside the bed, one ear tuned for hooves in the dark. But no one came. The railroad was pulling itself back together, weighing its next move. The truth was, the real fight was only starting. 3 days later, the newspapers hit the valley. The Helena Independent ran it across the front page. Farmer defends homestead against railroad intimidation. The territorial governor's office released a statement calling for a formal investigation. Word arrived from Helena that Bennett Crowell was taking Sawyer Holt's case without charge, calling it a matter of principle. But Red Iron Rail had newspapers of its own. Their version painted Sawyer as a dangerous vigilante who had murdered innocent workers in cold blood. They claimed Briggs Calderon's men had been conducting a peaceful land survey when they were ambushed without warning. Competing headlines spread across Montana territory, splitting public opinion. Some saw Sawyer as a man standing up to unchecked corporate power. Others branded him an obstacle to progress, a relic of a lawless frontier Montana needed to outgrow. Public opinion mattered less, though, than what unfolded in courtrooms. And in the dark, the legal battle began. Red Iron Rail filed suit for damages. Their attorneys were relentless, filing motion after motion. But Bennett Crowell proved just as sharp. And the local judge, who had homesteaded his own claim 3 decades earlier, wasn't as easy to bend as Thornwell's people expected. Then came the night riders. A week after the cornfield burned, 6 men approached the Holt homestead under cover of midnight. They found Ethan Lockridge and Miles Lockridge waiting with rifles, backed by Han Liu and 3 other armed farmers. The riders withdrew without firing a shot. The message was clear. This was no longer one isolated farmer. It was a valley willing to stand together. Red Iron Rail shifted tactics. They offered to buy out every farm in the valley, tripling the original price. Most families refused. 2 accepted the money and left Montana for good. Sawyer understood. Not everyone could afford to fight. Some had young children, others had aging parents. He held no bitterness toward them. By autumn, a stalemate set in. Red Iron Rail couldn't burn Sawyer out without risking an outright range war. Sawyer couldn't rebuild or expand without the capital his lost crop would have brought. Both sides dug in, waiting for the other to falter. Winter came early that year. Snow fell in October, blanketing the burned field in white, hiding the scars but never erasing them. The court fight dragged on for 2 long years. Eventually, under growing pressure from homesteaders across the territory, the government passed new water rights protections. Red Iron Rail was forced to route its line around the valley instead of through it. Briggs Calderon vanished after the incident, rumors placing him somewhere in Wyoming under another name. Kellen Voss recovered from his wounds and left Montana territory. Tobin Hale, the youngest of the hired guns, took the ordeal as a lesson, finding honest work on a ranch near Billings and never hiring his gun out again. Sawyer Holt never replanted corn on that 40-acre field. Instead, he let it return to grassland, a quiet marker of the day he chose to stand instead of run. The Winchester 73 went back on its pegs in the barn, though Sawyer cleaned it often. Some tools, he'd learned, were never meant to rust. The spring kept flowing, feeding the valley's farms. The community that had gathered around Sawyer stayed strong, sharing labor in hard seasons and celebrating together in good ones. And on quiet evenings, when Elin Holt brought coffee onto the porch, Sawyer would sometimes look out over that grassy field and remember the smoke, the gunfire, and the choice that shaped the rest of his life. They say a man's land is his legacy. But Sawyer Holt learned something deeper that day. A man's legacy isn't just the ground beneath his boots. It's what he's willing to risk to defend it, and the people he stands beside along the way. The frontier was closing. The wild days were slipping into memory. But in that Montana valley, for one smoke-choked morning in 1882, the Old West burned bright one last time. And that is the story of Sawyer Holt, a man who learned that sometimes the smoke from your burning dreams can hide you just long enough to fight back. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Your presence means more than you know. If today's story awakens something inside you, don't let the trail end here. There are many more tales of courage, devotion, and faith waiting to be discovered. Subscribe, comment, share, and come back as we continue this unforgettable journey. Thank you, truly. Aviso legal. Disclaimer. All stories are intended solely for entertainment and may include fictionalized scenarios or dramatization derived from historical contexts. While AI assists in production, human creators supervise and adjust every piece to maintain sincerity, credibility, and emotional quality. We adhere entirely to platform regulations regarding AI content, ensuring no deepfakes or misleading portrayals. Licensed materials are used responsibly. Republishing, modifying, or extracting content without authorization is not allowed. We appreciate every viewer who respects originality and creative effort.